Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a story that's been all over the news.
Oh, yeah.
The case of Natalia Grace.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you heard about this one?
A bit.
It's got like adoptions and accusations, and there are multiple families involved.
Really?
Even a dramatic escape.
Wow.
We'll be going through news articles and even docuseries clips and just seeing what we can figure out about this whole story.
I think what I find so interesting is that we're really talking about like what truth even is,
Yeah.
conflicting accounts,
Yeah.
subjective perceptions.
Right.
It's all about storytelling.
Well, let's lay out what we know for sure.
Okay.
Natalia Grace was adopted from Ukraine by a family, the Barnetts,
Okay.
back in 2010.
Okay.
She has a form of dwarfism.
Right.
It's called spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia congenita,
Yeah.
and this can sometimes lead to like skeletal abnormalities and shorter stature.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The Barnetts later claimed that Natalia was not a child at all, but an adult
Oh, wow.
masquerading as one.
Oh, my gosh.
They went so far as to legally change her age from 8 to 22.
I mean, you hear about these things, but to think it could actually happen,
Right.
it really makes you wonder what was happening.
Yeah.
The Barnetts pointed to, like, Natalia's alleged adult behaviors as evidence.
Like what?
Things like vocabulary knowledge, even claiming that she was menstruating. It's like a real-life version of that movie Orphan,
Oh, yeah.
a child who's not what they seem.
It does make you wonder if maybe pop culture influenced the Barnett's perceptions.
Right.
But at the same time, this is a real family
Absolutely.
with real stakes.
Yeah, for sure.
So we got to be careful.
So did anyone believe them?
Well, charges of neglect were filed against the Barnetts
Okay.
because after they moved to Canada, they left Natalia behind in an apartment.
They left her.
Yeah.
Oh,
The Barnetts said they provided for her,
okay.
but the prosecution argued that they had abandoned a vulnerable child.
Wow.
It's really tricky.
So what happened?
Well, Michael Barnett was acquitted,
Okay.
and the charges against Christine were later dismissed.
So that doesn't really give us a clear answer.
No, it just adds to the mystery.
What about Natalia? What does she think?
Well, for years, she didn't really say anything publicly.
Oh, wow.
But in 2024, she started speaking out,
Okay.
denying the Barnett's claims and saying that she was always a child.
I can't imagine having your identity questioned like that.
Yeah, it must have been so frustrating.
Yeah.
She actually confronted Michael Barnett in a docuseries.
Really?
It was a pretty powerful moment.
I bet. Did she have any evidence?
Well, she pursued DNA testing,
Okay.
trying to determine her true age.
Interesting. What'd they find?
This is where it gets even more complicated.
Okay.
The test estimated her age to be closer to 22 at the time,
Okay.
which, doesn't line up with the Barnett's claims that she was much older,
Right.
but it also doesn't exactly confirm she was a child when adopted.
So inconclusive.
Yeah.
Doesn't really clear anything up.
It really makes you think about how our understanding of events is shaped by, viewpoints.
Yeah. And just different perceptions.
Right.
So what happened to Natalia after she started speaking out? Did she find somewhere safe?
Well, after the Barnetts, she was adopted by another family, the Manses.
Okay.
They were a religious couple who at first seemed very supportive.
Okay.
But the docuseries showed that this new chapter in Natalia's life
Yeah.
also had a lot of issues.
Oh, so even with a new family, things weren't simple.
No, the docuseries had allegations that the Manses were controlling
Really?
and potentially even abusive towards Natalia.
Oh, that's awful, especially after what happened with the Barnetts.
Right, and we're talking about someone with a disability
Right.
who might be more vulnerable.
So it makes you think about the systems that are supposed to be protecting her.
Definitely raises a lot of questions about adoption and support and the legal system.
So unsettling did she stay with the Manses?
For a while.
Okay.
But I remember we talked about a dramatic escape.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's where the Manses come in.
Okay.
Natalia had to escape from their home.
She had to escape from another family.
She coordinated with a friend
Wow.
and her old friends, the DePaul family, to leave in the middle of the night.
That's incredible what led up to that.
Well, that's what we'll talk about in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll go over the allegations against the Manses and everything that prompted Natalia's escape.
Every time we learn something new, it just gets more and more complex.
It does. And remember, we're dealing with real people here.
Of course.
Real emotions and real consequences.
Yeah, let's take a quick break and then get back to this.
Sounds good.
We'll dive into the next part of Natalia's story.
All right.
Okay, so we left off with Natalia escaping from the Manses' home in the middle of the night.
A real desperate flight for freedom.
Yeah, it's like something out of a movie.
You really got to wonder what would push someone to that.
What did she go through with the Manses? What were the allegations?
Well, the docuseries talked to people who knew the family, and they described them as controlling and manipulative.
Oh, gosh.
Some people even said they were physically and emotionally abusive toward Natalia,
That's just awful.
especially after what happened with the Barnetts.
Right.
Imagine going through that twice.
It's heartbreaking. And, Natalia has a disability,
Yeah.
which could make her more vulnerable.
It raises so many questions about the adoption system.
I know about the safeguards in place
The vetting process support for adopted children.
and how allegations of abuse are even investigated.
It's a lot to think about.
How did she even pull off the escape?
It seems like she was really resourceful.
Okay.
She reached out to her old friends, the DePaul family.
Okay.
They'd always been there for her,
Right.
and they helped her plan and carry out the escape.
Along with another friend named Mac?
Yeah.
Think about the courage that took.
To leave everything behind.
And go into the unknown like that.
It really shows how strong she is.
Yeah.
How determined to find a safe and loving place.
Especially after everything she'd been through.
She was still so young.
So the DePaul family, they're the same one she lives with now.
Right.
What a coincidence.
The DePauls actually tried to adopt her years ago,
Oh, wow.
but it didn't work out.
Really?
And now years later,
They're the ones who took her in.
it's like a full circle moment.
And they're also little people, right?
Yeah.
I think that must help.
They can really understand her experience.
In a way that other people can't.
It's like a shared understanding.
How has she been doing since she went to live with them?
It's complicated.
Oh,
On the one hand, she seems to be doing a lot better.
okay.
People say she's thriving in their care.
Good.
She's working on her GED, learning to drive.
Wow.
Like she's finally getting some normalcy.
That's so good to hear.
But the docuseries also showed some tension
Really?
between Natalia and the DePauls.
Like what?
Disagreements about boundaries,
Oh.
concerns about her boyfriend,
Oh, okay.
and there's anxiety about the Manses trying to contact her.
So even in a good environment, there are still challenges.
It makes sense, though. I mean,
Yeah.
she's been through so much trauma,
Yeah.
and she's trying to find her own voice.
Right.
And the DePauls are in new territory, too.
So true.
It's a delicate balance,
Yeah.
trying to guide her and respect her independence.
That's tough.
And she has to learn to trust again.
While also setting boundaries.
It shows how complex relationships can be.
Even the loving ones.
They need open communication and compromise.
What about legally? Are there any ongoing investigations?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
We know about the neglect charges against the Barnetts,
Right.
and even though they were dismissed,
Yeah.
their decision to leave her is still controversial.
And the Manses.
The allegations are serious.
But we don't know if any action's been taken.
It's kind of a gray area.
So a lot of unanswered legal questions.
But personally, it seems like she's found a place to heal.
It really shows her strength
Yeah,
and her spirit.
she's come through so much.
It reminds you that even in the darkest times, there's still hope.
It really does.
And it reminds us that we have to do better.
To protect vulnerable people,
Like Natalia,
the systems need to be stronger
more transparent.
and accountable.
So Natalia's found some stability with the DePauls.
Yeah.
But what about the bigger picture?
What do we learn from this whole thing about adoption?
Especially international adoptions.
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll be talking about in the last part of our deep dive.
We'll explore those implications
Okay.
from Natalia's story.
Sounds good.
Natalia's story is really one that you just keep thinking about.
It is.
We went from an adoption to legal battles to accusations and even an escape.
Yeah.
Now she seems to be doing well with the DePauls.
Right.
But I guess as we wrap up our deep dive,
Yeah.
what are the bigger lessons here?
I mean, this case really brings up some important issues with adoption,
Yeah.
especially international adoptions and children with special needs.
So what kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, imagine, dealing with a whole other legal system. Maybe there are language barriers.
And you might not have all the information about the child's history.
Exactly.
That's a lot to deal with.
And then you're trying to meet the needs of a child who might have experienced trauma
Yeah.
and could have medical or developmental issues.
It's a huge responsibility.
And sometimes things go wrong, even with the best intentions.
Like we saw with Natalia.
Right.
Two different families struggled to give her the care she needed.
It shows that even though adoptions can be successful,
Yeah.
there are real challenges.
And we have to acknowledge that.
It really highlights how important safeguards are.
Yeah, like what kind of things?
Better background checks for parents,
Okay.
psychological evaluations, for everyone involved
And support services.
throughout the whole process.
And I think cultural sensitivity is really important too,
Exactly.
especially with international adoptions.
Understanding the child's background,
Yeah.
their culture,
Right.
any language differences.
It's so easy to make assumptions
We have to be open-minded.
and willing to learn.
And communication is key.
Yeah, we saw how miscommunication and conflicting stories really impacted Natalia,
Being open and honest is so important.
especially in these complex situations.
Parents need to be able to advocate for their kids,
Right.
explain what they need, and ask for help.
And kids need to feel safe to talk about their feelings.
Exactly.
They have to trust that they'll be heard.
It takes trust on both sides,
And even then, communication can break down.
which is why support systems are so important.
Therapists, social workers.
Support groups for families.
This whole case really makes you think about perspective
Yeah.
and how easily stories can change.
We have the Barnett side, Natalia's side.
The Menses, the DePauls.
Like a puzzle with missing pieces,
It shows how hard it can be to find the truth.
especially when it comes to people's experiences.
And personal feelings.
We have to be skeptical.
And consider different viewpoints.
It's easy to jump to conclusions.
So it's usually more complicated than that.
I think Natalia's story also makes us look at our own biases.
Right.
We all have them.
And we need to be aware of how they affect our judgments.
It's about recognizing those preconceived notions.
This has been really eye-opening.
It has.
We went from a simple adoption story to these really deep questions about family.
Identity and the systems that are supposed to protect people.
It reminds us that we need to listen to people who are marginalized.
Yeah.
Natalia's story shows the power of speaking up.
Even when it's hard.
I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah,
It's been fascinating and unsettling.
definitely.
Any last thoughts for our listeners?
I would say keep looking into these kinds of stories.
Okay.
Have those tough conversations.
Yeah.
And question your own assumptions.
The world is full of complexities.
But if we're willing to learn and empathize,
Right.
we can make the world a better place.
That's a great point. And thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into the case of Natalia Grace.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll be back soon with another interesting topic, so stay curious.